The question of what happens when we die has puzzled humanity for thousands of years. Today, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and groundbreaking theories about consciousness and death, proposed by one of the greatest minds of our time, Stephen Hawking. His revolutionary ideas suggest that death might not be the final end we've always believed it to be, but rather a transition into something we're only beginning to understand. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below and let me know what country or city you're in. It always amazes me to see how far these ideas can travel around the world. And if you're finding this exploration as fascinating as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us reach more curious minds like yours who want to understand these profound mysteries of existence. Stephen Hawking spent his entire career pushing the boundaries of what we thought possible about the universe, black holes, and the very nature of reality itself. But perhaps his most intriguing work focused on something much closer to home, the human mind and what might happen to our consciousness when our physical bodies can no longer sustain life. Unlike many scientists who avoided this topic entirely, Hawking approached it with the same rigorous scientific method he applied to understanding the cosmos. To understand Hawking's theory, we first need to grasp what consciousness actually is. Think of your mind right now as you're listening to these words. You're not just processing sounds or reading text, you're experiencing awareness itself. You have thoughts, feelings, memories, and a sense of being you. This is consciousness, and it's perhaps the most mysterious phenomenon in the entire universe. Scientists can map every neuron in your brain, they can see which areas light up when you think different thoughts, but they still can't fully explain how physical matter creates the experience of being aware. Hawking proposed that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of brain activity, but something far more fundamental. He suggested that consciousness might be a form of information, and here's where it gets really interesting. In physics, we know that information cannot be destroyed. This is called the conservation of information principle, and it's one of the most important laws in the universe. When you burn a book, the physical pages turn to ash, but the information contained in those pages doesn't vanish into nothing. It gets transformed and redistributed, but it continues to exist in some form. If consciousness is indeed a form of information, then according to the laws of physics, it cannot simply disappear when the brain stops functioning. This is where Hawking's theory becomes truly revolutionary. He proposed that what we call death is actually just a transition, a transformation of consciousness from one state to another, much like water transforming from liquid to vapor. The essence remains, but its form changes completely. Consider how a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. To an outside observer, it might seem like the caterpillar dies when it enters the chrysalis. Its familiar form disappears entirely, dissolved into what scientists call imaginal soup. Yet from this apparent destruction emerges something entirely new and beautiful. The butterfly contains the same essential information as the caterpillar, but expressed in a completely different form. Hawking suggested our consciousness might undergo a similar transformation at death. But where does this consciousness go? This is where Hawking's deep understanding of quantum physics comes into play. At the quantum level, reality behaves in ways that seem impossible to our everyday experience. Particles can exist in multiple places at once. They can be connected across vast distances instantaneously, and information can be stored in ways that transcend our normal understanding of space and time. Hawking proposed that consciousness, being information, might tap into these quantum realms in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Imagine consciousness as a radio signal. When your radio breaks, the music doesn't cease to exist. It continues broadcasting on frequencies your broken device can no longer receive. Similarly, when the brain, our biological receiver, stops functioning, the consciousness signal might continue to exist and broadcast on frequencies we haven't yet learned to detect or understand. This doesn't mean consciousness floats around like a ghost, but rather that it might be woven into the very fabric of reality itself in ways that transcend our current scientific instruments. One of the most compelling aspects of Hawking's theory relates to his work on black holes. He discovered that even these cosmic monsters, which seem to destroy everything that falls into them, actually preserve information in subtle ways. This led him to believe that the universe has built-in mechanisms for preserving information, no matter how dramatically matter and energy might be transformed. If the universe preserves information even in the most extreme conditions imaginable, why wouldn't it preserve the information pattern that creates human consciousness? Recent discoveries in neuroscience support aspects of Hawking's thinking. Scientists have found that consciousness isn't located in any single part of the brain, but emerges from incredibly complex patterns of information flow between billions of neurons. Your sense of being you arises from these information patterns, not from any particular piece of brain tissue. When you remember your childhood, learn something new, or feel an emotion, you're experiencing information patterns shifting and flowing through your neural networks. This understanding suggests that consciousness is more like software running on the hardware of the brain, rather than the hardware itself. When a computer breaks, the software programs don't cease to exist. They're simply no longer running on that particular machine. They could theoretically run on other computers or be stored in different forms. Hawking wondered if consciousness might work similarly, capable of existing independently of its original biological hardware under the right conditions. The implications of this theory extend far beyond death itself. If consciousness is indeed information that can be preserved and transformed, it changes everything about how we understand life, identity, and our place in the universe. It suggests that every thought you've ever had, every moment of awareness you've experienced, becomes part of an eternal information structure that cannot be destroyed, only transformed. But Hawking was careful to distinguish his scientific theory from religious or spiritual beliefs. He wasn't proposing heaven or hell or any form of afterlife that resembles human experience. Instead, he suggested that the transformation of consciousness at death might be so fundamental that it would be unlike anything we can currently imagine or understand. Just as a butterfly's experience is incomprehensibly different from a caterpillar's, post-death consciousness might operate on entirely different principles than what we experience while alive. This theory also addresses one of the deepest human fears, the fear of complete annihilation. Most people aren't afraid of being dead. They're afraid of the process of dying and the idea that their entire existence, everything they are, will simply vanish. Hawking's theory suggests that while the familiar form of consciousness we know ends, something essential continues. It's not immortality in the traditional sense, but rather transformation into something we cannot yet comprehend. The scientific community remains divided on these ideas. Some researchers embrace the possibility that consciousness might be more fundamental than we previously thought, while others argue that consciousness is simply an emergent property of complex brain activity that ends when the brain dies. However, even skeptics acknowledge that we still understand very little about consciousness itself, leaving room for theories that once seemed impossible. What makes Hawking's approach so compelling is that he applied the same logical rigor to consciousness that he used to unlock secrets of black holes and the origin of the universe. He didn't rely on faith or wishful thinking, but on mathematical principles and scientific observation. He recognized that consciousness presents us with a genuine scientific mystery that deserves serious investigation rather than dismissal. Recent experiments in quantum physics have revealed phenomena that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations of scientists. Quantum entanglement allows particles to influence each other instantaneously across vast distances. Quantum superposition enables particles to exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. These discoveries show us that reality operates according to principles far stranger than our everyday experience suggests. In this context, Hawking's ideas about consciousness transformation don't seem quite so far-fetched. The theory also offers a new perspective on why consciousness evolved in the first place. If consciousness is just a biological accident with no deeper significance, it seems puzzling that evolution would have produced beings capable of contemplating their own existence, creating art, developing moral principles, and seeking truth. But if consciousness represents something fundamental about the structure of reality itself, then its emergence through biological evolution makes perfect sense. We might be the universe's way of becoming aware of itself. Personal accounts from people who have had near-death experiences often describe encounters with forms of consciousness that seem to transcend normal awareness. While these experiences can't be scientifically verified, they're remarkably consistent across different cultures and belief systems. People describe a sense of expanded awareness, connection to larger patterns of information, and encounters with consciousness that seems to exist independently of physical bodies. While we can't prove these experiences represent actual glimpses of post-death consciousness, they align intriguingly with what Hawking's theory might predict. The technological implications of this theory are equally fascinating. If consciousness is indeed information that can be preserved and potentially transferred, it opens possibilities for technologies we can barely imagine today. Scientists are already working on brain-computer interfaces that can read neural patterns and translate them into digital information. While we're still far from understanding consciousness well enough to preserve or transfer it, Hawking's theory suggests such developments might eventually be possible. Understanding consciousness as preserved information also changes how we think about the legacy we leave behind. Every interaction you have, every person you influence, every idea you share becomes part of an interconnected web of consciousness that extends far beyond your individual existence. Your thoughts and actions ripple outward, influencing other conscious beings in ways that persist long after your physical form has transformed. In this sense, aspects of your consciousness continue to exist and influence the world through the consciousness of others. The theory doesn't minimize the reality of grief and loss that accompanies death. The familiar form of consciousness we know and love in another person genuinely ends when they die. We can no longer interact with them in ways we're accustomed to, and that loss is real and profound. But Hawking's theory suggests that something essential about their consciousness, the information pattern that made them uniquely themselves, continues to exist in transformed form within the larger structure of reality. This perspective can provide comfort without requiring belief in traditional religious concepts. It's based on scientific principles rather than faith, yet it suggests that death isn't the complete annihilation many people fear. Instead, it's a transformation into something we don't yet understand, a continuation of the information that creates consciousness in a form beyond our current comprehension. The implications extend to how we understand our current lives as well. If consciousness is information that becomes part of the eternal structure of reality, then every moment of awareness you experience has permanent significance. Every act of kindness, every creative thought, every moment of genuine connection with another conscious being becomes part of something larger and more enduring than your individual existence. Scientists continue to explore these ideas through various approaches. Some researchers study quantum effects in biological systems, looking for evidence that consciousness might indeed operate according to quantum principles. Others investigate the hard problem of consciousness itself, trying to understand how subjective experience arises from objective physical processes. While we're still far from definitive answers, the questions Hawking raised continue to drive important research into the nature of mind, consciousness, and reality itself. The theory also suggests that consciousness might be far more common in the universe than we typically assume. If consciousness represents a fundamental aspect of information processing, then it might emerge wherever information reaches sufficient complexity and organization. This could mean that consciousness exists in forms we haven't yet recognized, perhaps in artificial intelligence systems, in ecological networks, or even in cosmic structures we haven't yet learned to perceive as conscious entities. What's particularly remarkable about Hawking's approach is how it bridges the gap between scientific materialism and human meaning. Traditional materialism suggests that consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain chemistry with no deeper significance. Traditional spirituality often requires belief in supernatural concepts that conflict with scientific understanding. Hawking's theory offers a third path, one that honors both scientific rigor and the profound mystery of conscious experience. The practical implications of accepting this theory are profound. If consciousness truly continues in transformed form after death, then how we live our current lives takes on deeper significance. The information patterns we create through our thoughts, actions, and relationships don't disappear but become part of the permanent structure of reality. This suggests that living with awareness, compassion, and genuine connection isn't just personally fulfilling but contributes to something larger and more enduring than individual existence. As we continue to push the boundaries of scientific understanding, Hawking's theory about consciousness and death remains one of the most intriguing possibilities for bridging the gap between what we know and what we hope might be true. It doesn't promise reunion with loved ones or eternal bliss, but it does suggest that the profound mystery of being conscious, of being aware and able to contemplate existence itself, connects us to something fundamental about the nature of reality. The journey to understand consciousness and its relationship to death continues. New technologies allow us to peer deeper into the workings of the brain, while advances in quantum physics reveal ever stranger aspects of reality's underlying structure. Perhaps future discoveries will validate Hawking's revolutionary ideas, or perhaps they'll lead us in entirely different directions. But regardless of where the evidence ultimately leads, Hawking's willingness to apply rigorous scientific thinking to humanity's deepest questions has opened new avenues for understanding what it means to be conscious beings in a mysterious universe. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of one of the most profound theories about consciousness and death ever proposed by a scientist. If you found these ideas as thought-provoking as I do, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on whether consciousness might indeed continue beyond physical death. Until our paths cross again in this grand adventure of understanding, keep questioning, keep wondering, and keep exploring the magnificent mysteries that surround us every day.